All right, get ready, because today we're diving into some seriously wild stuff. And I mean, seriously mind bending. You've sent over a whole bunch of articles and videos all about this thing, mind uploading.
Yeah, mind uploading. Basically, how do we transfer consciousness to a computer?
Exactly. We're talking like the potential to live forever in the cloud, explore virtual worlds just as pure consciousness, even get this merging our minds into a collective superintelligence. I mean, come on, is this really something we could actually see in our lifetime?
Well, let's just say there's some pretty brilliant folks out there who are definitely working towards making it happen. But
Okay.
before we all run out and start designing our digital avatars and everything,
Right.
there are some, pretty big hurdles, some pretty major hurdles we got to figure out.
Yeah, no kidding.
For starters, yeah, we need to be able to actually map the entire human brain. And we're not just talking about a basic picture here. We're talking like down to the activity of every single neuron.
Which is how many? Because I'm pretty sure I saw that a worm, like a simple worm, has a lot of neurons.
Yeah, so a worm has like 30,000 neurons, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
But the human brain, we're talking about 86 billion neurons.
Mm-hmm.
30,000 versus 86 billion.
So mapping the human brain is like exponentially more complex.
Oh, yeah, exponentially.
Yeah.
It's not just about taking a picture. We're talking we have to be able to identify every single neuron, every single synapse, the location, the structure, understand how they communicate with each other, the signals, the electrical, the chemical, everything that makes it like literally our thoughts, emotions, our experiences.
Oh, okay. So it's a lot more than just like, where is it? It's like, what is it doing?
Yes, exactly. It's like
Yeah.
it's like if you listen to like a grand symphony and you want to try to understand how it works, but you're only allowed to look at like where each individual instrument is placed, not actually hear them play.
Right. It's the difference between knowing the ingredients list and having the actual recipe and instructions. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. But one of the articles that I was reading, it mentioned Neuralink, Elon Musk's company. They're doing like the brain implants and stuff. Are they close to figuring this out? Like, are we talking microchips that like make us immortal?
Well, I mean, Neuralink is definitely a huge player. I'll give them that. But their focus right now is more on the neural prosthetics
Okay,
than full-blown mind uploading.
got it.
So they're working on these devices, these implantable devices that can interact with the brain,
Mm-hmm.
and it'll potentially help people who have like paralysis or other, neurological conditions and things like that. But it's more about like repair or enhancement of the existing brain.
So less about like taking what's there and like copying it somewhere else, but more like upgrading the hardware.
Yes, exactly. Think of it like replacing a faulty wire in a circuit.
Okay.
You're not replacing the whole circuit, you're just replacing that one piece.
So it's a step in the right direction. It's just a different path.
Exactly. And it's a very different approach from what kind of dominates the mind uploading conversation.
Yeah.
And that's the scan and copy method.
Right. Scan and copy. Tell me more about that.
So scan and copy is essentially like, what if we could just scan your entire brain,
Yeah.
like the structure, the activity, everything, get it all, and just copy and paste it into a supercomputer somewhere, and that would be it.
Like a perfect replica.
Exactly.
But then there's still, like, even if we had the technology, let's say we get to that point where it's like, okay, we can store all that information, can see every neuron, every synapse, we have it all. There's still the question of, like, is that digital copy actually you?
You're getting into like the big question,
Yeah.
the mind-body problem.
Right.
And that's been a philosophy debate for centuries.
Right, exactly.
Because like, is consciousness an emergent property of, your physical brain?
Mm-hmm.
Is it inseparable from, your biology, your meat sack?
Mm-hmm.
Or can it exist independently? And that's a huge, like, we don't know.
Right. So even with all that data, all that information, those neurons, we might still need a body, even if it's not flesh and blood.
Yeah, because some experts think that even if you could upload like a mind, it might not be able to function without any kind of like sensory input or interaction with the environment.
So it's like being a brain in a jar, basically.
Kind of, yeah. Like imagine just experiencing life without like touch, taste, smell. Like you can't interact with anything. You just receive information potentially.
It's like being stuck in your own head, basically.
Yeah, and that brings up a whole other question of, is that even existence at that point?
Right. Is that living?
Yeah. So, it's definitely a lot more complex than some of those like really cool sci-fi movies make it seem.
It always is. It's
Yeah.
always more complicated. Okay, so we've established that mapping the human brain, crazy difficult. Even if we could do it, there's still the philosophical debate of like, would those digital copies even be conscious? Would it even be us? All that good stuff.
I'm impressed. You're picking this up really quickly.
Well, I try to keep up. But so with all that being said, with all those hurdles, all that complexity, are we even close?
Well, we haven't quite reached, like, matrix level mind uploading yet.
Okay.
There have been some pretty remarkable breakthroughs.
Okay, let's hear it. I need some good news after all this like brain twisting stuff. So tell me about these breakthroughs. Are we talking flying cars and teleportation, or are we talking even cooler brain stuff?
We'll have to wait a bit longer for flying cars, but
Mm.
the brain stuff is, yeah, it's pretty amazing. Just this past April, scientists at Duke, they created this incredibly detailed 3D image of a mouse brain.
Okay, so we're back to mouse brains. But what makes this image so special? Like, haven't we seen images of brains before?
It's the resolution. Like, it's unbelievable. It's 64 million times sharper than anything we've ever seen before.
Okay, so how do I wrap my head around that?
Okay, so imagine you're looking at the moon, right?
Right.
And instead of just seeing, like, this blurry orb, you can make out, like, individual craters,
Mm.
maybe even Neil Armstrong's footprint.
Wow.
That's the level of detail we're talking about, but on a microscopic level.
That's incredible. But a mouse brain isn't a human brain. So how does this bring us closer to understanding the complexities of our own minds, let alone uploading them?
That's a great question, and it kind of highlights just how much we still don't know. This breakthrough, it's really about the tools and the techniques to map these incredibly complex biological structures, right?
Mhm.
So think of it like inventing a more powerful microscope. It doesn't give you all the answers right away, but it allows you to ask entirely new questions
Oh,
and
oh.
kind of explore new frontiers.
So we're building the spaceship before we even know where in the universe we're going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of spaceships, one of the sources that you sent over mentioned these things called generative models.
Right. Generative models. I feel like that's something I've heard like buzzing around,
Yeah.
in the ether.
It's a hot topic.
It's a hot topic. What are they and how do they play into all of this?
Okay, so imagine an AI, right? And it learns how to write a novel.
Yeah.
But it learns by analyzing like thousands of other novels,
Mhm.
not just copying and pasting, but actually like learning the patterns, the structures, like the nuances of storytelling. And then it creates something totally new based on that knowledge. That's essentially what generative models are doing.
So they're like super powered pattern recognition machines.
Yeah, exactly. They're finding these patterns, and some researchers believe that if we feed them enough data about the brain, whether it's neural activity, genetic information, all of it,
Right.
they might actually be able to unlock the secrets of how our brains actually work.
So AI that could potentially crack the code of consciousness.
Yeah, potentially, that's the hope. But again, it's still very speculative. There's a lot of debate about whether, replicating brain activity is enough, or if there's something more, it's something we don't understand.
It's all starting to feel very Black Mirror to me, I gotta say. Like, it's thrilling and terrifying all at the same time.
Yeah.
But even if we could create conscious digital copies of ourselves, shouldn't we maybe, pump the brakes for a second and think about the ethics of all of this?
100%, yeah. And thankfully, a lot of the sources that you sent over, they actually dive deep into those very issues because it's not just about what's possible, it's what's desirable, ethical, What are the unintended consequences here? We have to ask those questions.
All right, so let's talk ethics, because whoa, there are a lot of potential issues here. What are some of the big ones? What do we need to be thinking about when we're talking about a future, where mind uploading is a thing?
Yeah, well, one of the biggest ones is who gets access to this technology?
Right.
Because if this really does become a reality, it's probably going to be pretty expensive, at least at first.
So we're talking digital immortality as like a luxury
Yeah, pretty much.
that only the ultra wealthy can afford.
Yeah, exactly.
That doesn't feel very fair.
No.
Not at all.
And it raises some concerns about, widening the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Like you've got this whole group of people who can basically transcend their physical limitations
Yeah.
and potentially live forever.
Right.
And then,
everybody else.
yeah, everybody else is kind of stuck dealing with, reality as it is.
Right. Stuck in, what was that phrase? Meat space.
Need space, yes.
I love that. But it makes you wonder, if we're not limited by these physical bodies anymore, what even is humanity at that point? Do we even recognize ourselves in that kind of a digital afterlife?
That's a huge question, and I don't think there's a simple answer to that.
Yeah.
We've talked about this. It really challenges, everything we think we know about life and death, what it means to be conscious.
Right. Because the whole idea of your consciousness existing in some server farm somewhere.
Yeah.
It's
That's a
wild.
lot to wrap your head around.
It really is. It's like we're on the verge of writing like a whole new chapter in the human story, but we don't even know what language it's going to be written in.
Exactly, yeah. And then there's the whole other can of worms, about what happens when we create digital consciousness. Like, if there's a copy of your mind running around in a computer, does it have the same rights as you? You know? Does it deserve the same moral considerations?
And who owns that data?
Yes, exactly. Who owns that data?
Like, can your digital self, like, sue someone? Can your digital self, like, own property? Like, what are the rules here?
Right. Who gets to decide what happens to your digital self after, after you're gone from the physical world?
Yeah.
That's a lot of power
Right.
for someone to have over someone else's existence, even if that existence is, digital.
Yeah. And I mean, not to mention, like, all the cybersecurity concerns. Like, imagine, somebody hacking your, like, digital mind,
Yeah.
holding it hostage.
Oh, it's terrifying when you start to think about it,
Just
right?
like all our worst fears about technology get amplified.
Exactly. It's why we need to be having these conversations now, like right now, before this stuff becomes a reality. We need rules. We need ethics,
Guidelines, yeah.
Yeah, guidelines for sure. Like, how are we going to interact with this technology? What happens if it creates, other beings? I don't know. It's a lot.
It's a lot to think about. And, it's funny because after diving into all of this, reading all these articles, watching all these videos, it almost makes you think, like, what if we took all the energy, all the effort, all the brain power, all the money even that we're pouring into, like, trying to create digital copies of ourselves? What if we used all that to better understand the brains we already have?
Right. What if we just, like, maxed out the human potential that we already know exists?
Exactly. Like, imagine what we could accomplish if we were just, like, firing on all cylinders,
Yeah. It's pretty amazing to think about. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in, what the future might hold that we forget that, like, we have so much potential right now.
Right here, right now.
Yeah. In this moment.
We're capable of incredible things, you know? Creativity, compassion, innovation. Maybe instead of trying to, like, escape our humanity, we should figure out ways to, like, really lean into it,
Yeah, I love
to
that.
connect with each other and, maybe even solve some of the problems that are, right in front of us.
I think that's a perfect place to kind of like wrap up this whole conversation.
Yeah, it is. And, I want to thank you so much for joining us and for walking us through all of this.
My pleasure. It's been fun.
It's been fascinating. And for everyone listening, we hope this has sparked your curiosity. Keep those brains firing, keep asking questions, because the future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something that we create.
Well said.
And on that note, we'll catch you next time.